We're so glad you guys are here. Let's go ahead and worship together.
And the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. 'Cause you are good, you're good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. You are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. You're never gonna let me down. 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 You're never gonna let me God, we thank you so much for this time that we get to worship and praise you, God. God, you are so good to us. You really are the King of Kings. You're the King of Glory. You're the King of Peace. We love you so much, God. Right now, I ask that you open up our hearts, open up our ears, open up our minds to receive the word that's going to come forth. love you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Go ahead and take the time to turn and greet each other.
We live in a world that questions everything. Even God. But can God handle my questions? The Bible is filled with skeptical people. But what can we learn from someone who argued with God?
Hey, Crossroads, how are you? Good to see you here today. My name is Dan Chapin. I'm a teaching pastor here. And man, we have been in an incredible season where God has just been on the move through our Unstoppable initiative. And there's some really cool things that I know God has got to do in us and through us. In fact, Pastor Brian wanted to share some unstoppable things with you. Check out this video.
Well, hey, Crossroads, it is Pastor Brian, and I want to tell you, I am still so pumped up about what God did last weekend. It's amazing. It was our Unstoppable Commitment Weekend, and guys, we had over 430 families financially commit to a 2-year unstoppable journey to reach more people in the Central Valley for Jesus. It was amazing. But we know that some of you were just not able to be here last weekend, and we want you to be a part too. We know you've been tracking with us from the very beginning on this whole thing, and you want to be a part, so we're ready for you, and we get it. Sometimes getting here every weekend is rough, totally understand, so we got you. In fact, you should see a commitment card that we would love for you to fill out and turn in today on your seat back. Now, if you're joining us online, we're going to be putting a link for you in the chat so you guys can be a part of this too, because guys, we know you're out there, we know you're a part of what's happening, and we want you to join in as well. So remember this, that we want you to add up your normal giving to Crossroads on an annual basis, as well as your additional unstoppable generosity over the next 2 years. And so at the back of the auditorium, for those of you that are here in Manteca, there'll be 2 unstoppable tables that are set up for you that we want you to do 2 things. First, we want you to put your unstoppable commitment card in that offering box next to the table. Then we want you to write the name of your one on the canvas that's back there too. Now, this is really important because that is a reminder of what Unstoppable is all about. It's about our ones, reaching more people for Jesus. Because remember, what we're doing matters. It matters to those that are far from God. It matters to those struggling with mental illness, and it matters to the future of our church to be free to do what God has called us to do. Because we live in a world that is in desperate need of Jesus and his love. And through our generosity and our sacrifice, we can be a bigger part of God's plan right here at Crossroads. Now, I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to pray for you, and I want to encourage you to step up and step out in faith during this unstoppable season and commit to join the rest of us as we crash together for Jesus. I'm going to tell you, you will never regret it because doing something for Jesus is always worth it. I'm so proud of you, Crossroads. Can't wait to see what God is going to do through you with our unstoppable God Spirit in you. So let me pray for you. Father God, I lift up every person that's here within the sound of my voice, every man, woman, and child. Father, as they step forward and say, we want to be unstoppable for you, God, because we know you're unstoppable. We know your church is unstoppable, and this world needs Jesus. God, I pray for them as they financially commit now to be a part of this 2-year journey, that you would provide for them, that you would bless them, that you would keep them safe and you would keep them healthy, but you would challenge them each and every day to become more and more like you. God, we know that you're worth it. We know you're unstoppable. Your word tells us that over and over and over. Might we believe that in our life? Might our faith reflect that? And may we see the Central Valley change because of what happens here. God, we love you. We know you go with us. Bless this unstoppable journey beyond what we can imagine. Multiply it beyond what we can imagine. And God, use every bit of faith, every bit of us to win more people for Jesus. We love you. We thank you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Hey, love you guys. Thank you for what you're doing. God bless you. Pastor Dan, you're up. Tag, you're it.
All right, all right. Well, thank you, Pastor Brian. Don't forget those commitment cards are sitting right next to you. It looks like this. I encourage you to be able to take time after the service, pray with your family, head into the back. Those offering boxes are there for you to submit your commitment card, and don't forget that canvas as well. Well, we are in a brand new message series that's going to be leading up to Easter called Arguing with God, Arguing with God. And upon first hearing that title, you might be thinking to yourself, Dan, can we argue with God? Like, I thought like he's this all-powerful, all-knowing thing that we just trust blindly and don't ask any questions. And really, if you think about it, if we take the posture of recognizing God as our Father, we'll see why arguing with God can actually lead to our benefit. One of the things that is something I really miss is when my kids were really young. Like, I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I really miss the days when they're super squishy and really cute and cuddly, and really the only problems you had to fix was to stop them crying. Like, that was it. You just stopped them crying, right? You had to change their diaper, you had to feed them, you had to entertain them in some way, or they needed a good long nap. Geez, I really kind of miss those days, actually. But what's so interesting is as they get older, they start to, like, develop a personality a little bit, and sometimes they like to argue with you. The first time you ask your kids to do anything, it really is like they're so excited to do something for you because that means they're getting bigger. Like, they're getting responsibility. They're like, yeah, I'm all excited to do that. Like, hey, Roman, you want to help me take out the trash? Roman's one of my sons. He'll go like, yeah, that sounds great. And like my youngest, Braden, you want to help me like get your clothes ready for the next day? Yeah, that sounds great. But after a while, after I've asked them after the first time, then the second time, things start turning from yeah to why. Like, why would I do something like that? And the argument begins with that why, doesn't it? There's something about asking why that it starts to begin this cascading effect of an argument. Like, I can remember one morning just a few weeks ago, I asked my son, Roman, I was like, hey, Roman, go put on your shoes. We got to get ready for school. And he said, why? I was like, all right, here it comes. Well, because school is about ready to start. We need to get out the door and get ready for it. Why? Because you need to learn, Roman. You need to learn. Why? Because I said so? Like, I don't know what else you want from me. Why? And it just kind of starts cascading. And as he's starting to talk to me, I'm starting to recognize he's not getting the big picture here. He's not getting. So he asked why, and I said, because if you don't go to school, you won't learn. Why? Well, if you don't learn, you won't be able to graduate high school. Why? Well, if you don't graduate high school, you won't be able to get a really good job someday. Why? Because the world is a cruel place, Roman, that wants to squash you down, destroy your dreams, ruin your life forever. Now, all you have to do, and the reality is all of your life is dependent on this moment right here, right now. Just go put on your shoes. Why? It just keeps on hitting, doesn't it? Arguments, as you would notice, arguments end up becoming something that might be frustrating for us humans. But for God, when we argue with him, as with my son Roman, my son, he was asking questions, revealed more and more the bigger truth of where his place was in the world and why right now doing those little things actually matter. But he wouldn't have recognized that if he didn't have the argument. And so for us, when it comes to us and God, sometimes we miss this idea that arguing with him can actually reveal bigger truths about him and our place in it in this world. In fact, that kind of just leads me to my first point, is that arguing with God reveals who we are in this world. Like my kids, when they ask me the question and unravels all these truths about our world and our small place in it, so too when we argue with God, it reveals who he is in this world. Not who we want him to be, but who he is. And unfortunately, sometimes we miss the necessity of arguing with God. We think that God just can't handle our tough questions. So honestly, we just never ask them. Or when we do ask them, we get just like a little too simplistic of an answer, and we accept them for what they are and think, man, if that's how God wants to answer them, he's too shallow. Or we think that the answer is just not good enough for me. And rather than digging deeper, we just tend to accept it. Well, if that's how God wants to answer that question, I don't want anything to do with following him. Or we think if that's how God answers that question, then he must not even be real to begin with. Or maybe you simply are just too afraid to ask the question because of the potential implications of how it might affect or change your life. You realize if you get the answer that you know you're not suspecting, you are going to have to change something in your life. A few years ago, actually, no, not years ago, a few months ago, I had been avoiding reading a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And it was written by a Christian author. And I realized that the reason why I was avoiding reading that book, I didn't want to slow down. I don't want to slow down. I wanted to hear how God wants me to slow down in life. So rather than argue with him and trying to find out the answers, I avoided it. Instead of taking too simplistic answers, instead of avoiding the question, we need to recognize that God can handle our arguments. He wants us to probe deeper with our doubt, with our curiosity, with our understanding of right and wrong. He wants us to ask and argue with him because it reveals who he is in this world. And if we never argue with God, it says something about us. Listen to what pastor and theologian Dr. Timothy Keller said. If your God never disagrees with you, you might just be worshiping an idealized version of yourself. Arguing with God is a key factor in getting to know him better for who he is, and not just who we want him to be, not for who we hope he is, but for who he actually is. So this year we'll be taking a really close look into this idea of arguing with God leading up to Easter. And we're going to look at the perspective of someone who actually had an argument with God. We're going to look at the perspective of Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate and the questions that he asked Jesus before he went to the cross. And we're going to see this interaction that Pilate has with Jesus. But first, let's remember how we got to Pontius Pilate. Jesus has had 3 years of incredible, powerful, impactful ministry where people all over the Judean area and beyond were trying to figure out who this Jesus guy was. And thousands of people were following him. He was doing incredible miracles. And all of that ministry was leading to the last final nights as we lead up to Jesus and him getting crucified. And there's this moment that takes place before he's arrested, where he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciples after he's done the Lord's Supper, after he's shown them what communion was all about. He takes them to the Garden of Gethsemane and he wants them to pray. So he has them sitting over in a corner. He walks to the other side of the garden and he prays. And he prays so hard and so fervently that his tears and his sweat were starting to come out blood because the anxiety was so intense. And as he's praying, he's asking God, take this cup, take this pain, take this from me. I don't know if I can handle it. And as he's praying to God, he looks over and sees his disciples who were supposed to be praying for him. They had fallen asleep. And he goes to wake them up. And he says, don't you realize what's going to happen? Don't you realize what's going to happen to me? And it wasn't very long after that Judas Iscariot came. And he came with guards from the temple. And Judas walked up to Jesus and kissed him on the cheek, identifying in the darkness of night who Jesus was. And the guards rushed in and grabbed Jesus. Peter tried to fight him off, but Jesus was so good, he said, this is not the right time. And so Jesus goes off with the guards and he heads to Caiaphas' home, who is the high priest. He's in charge of the Jewish religious world, and they put him on trial. And Pastor Brian's going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But they eventually realized that, okay, he's guilty of whatever we think he's doing wrong. We need to execute him, but we don't have the power to do that. The Jewish people didn't have the power to do it. The only people that had the power to do that was the Roman emperor and the Roman governors. So they go to Pontius Pilate, who's a Roman governor, and they bring Jesus and this huge, like, riot-sized group of people, of religious elite, trying to put Jesus down, trying to execute him in the most excruciating way possible through the crucifixion. And they bring him to Jesus, and Jesus is standing before this judge, this executioner, this governor. And Pilate, I can imagine, has a sense of curiosity. Because one of Pilate's roles as governor is to squash down rebellions before they begin. In fact, just a few years prior to when Jesus was on the scene, he had done just that, and he made some big enemies of the Jewish people. And so as he's stepping into this situation where his role is to control the military, control the population, tax people, and execute people who are doing wrong, he's got Jesus before him, face to face. And as he's face to face, he asks a question that on the surface seems very simple. On the surface seems like something that is not that big of a deal. But as we look at this question, we're going to pull the thread of what it means, not just for Pilate at his time, but for our lives at this time, right here and now. And the question that we're going to see as we're looking at this is going to reveal God and who we are in this world. Remember, arguing with God, ultimately, it reveals who we are in this world. And so Pilate's going to see his place in this world as a result of asking this question. And so here's the question. In John chapter 18, verse 33, it says, Pilate then went back inside the palace and summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews? Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, like I said, upon first glance at this question, it doesn't seem to be that too big of a deal. I mean, maybe we're tempted to think like Pilate thought. Like, he's thinking, you know what, I'm not Jewish, therefore there's no way that this Jesus thing could be my king. But if we pull the thread on this question a little bit more, Pilate is probably asking a question because he's governor over the Jewish people. He doesn't want some other king coming in and getting people into a big frenzy and getting really taking up arms and fighting off the Roman Empire in some way. He doesn't want to affect the taxes. He doesn't want to affect his soldiers. If this is really someone who's claiming to be king of the Jews, he's got to step up and flex his military muscle. But if we pull the thread a little more on this question, Pilate doesn't think that this Jewish king could be his king. I mean, there's no way. I mean, Pilate doesn't ultimately think that Jesus can be for him at all. I mean, look at it. Pilate's not religious. And not to mention that, his king is not this carpenter standing in front of him in shackles. Pilate's king is Caesar in Rome with an army that the world has, so powerful the world has never seen before. His king, they thought, was divine. How could this king, with no army behind him, be divine? But if we pull the thread on this question just a little bit more, Pilate might be asking the question, is Jesus for me? I mean, is he for me? Is Jesus for me? Here, the thread of the question, it becomes more intriguing and more practical for us today. And like Pilate, we say, hey, Jesus can't be my king. There's just no way. He can't be for me, can he? I mean, look at the world around us. Jesus is for those religious people. And today we think that, hey, he's for those weird Christian people, right? He's for the people who pretend to have all the things figured out in life. He's for the ones that don't curse, don't drink, and don't have any fun on the weekends. And just like Pontius Pilate, we might think that Jesus is for the religious and not for us. And we argue with God and we say, hey, Jesus isn't for me. I mean, we think because of our background, our gender identity, our religious upbringing, our political affiliation, or our addiction, that all of that in our minds, all of that has somehow disqualified us from Jesus. We like to argue with God because we like to think that we are too far gone for Jesus to do anything with us, to want anything to do with us. And that gets us off the hook. We think that finding out the answers to the questions that we have for Jesus and for God, it's just not for us. It's not even necessary. And that gets us off the hook. Because the question, are you the king of the Jews? Yes, it's a religious question for sure that Pilate is asking, but it's also a question of authority. We like to argue with God and think Jesus is not for me because if he calls himself king, if he calls himself king in this world, are you kidding me? Have you seen what our world is like? I mean, for you, maybe your wife has divorced you because they left you for another person. And now you're picking up the pieces of your life. You're taking care of the kids and she's suing you for mental duress. Or maybe you think, you know what? There's no way he can be my king. There's no way he's in charge of this world. I've been a good person my whole life. I have a good job. I had a good job, and then I lost that job, and now I'm behind on paying the bills, and I can't pay the mortgage on the home that I inherited from my family. I'm going to lose everything I ever had. Where is Jesus, a king? Or maybe it's a little bit different than you. Maybe it's as simple as you turn on the news and you see a war in Ukraine and wars in the Middle East and Israel. You see the own chaos that might be happening in your own backyard and your own community, and you think to yourself, there's no way Jesus could be king of this world. No way. Dan, if that's the type of king that you were talking about, then he just isn't for me. There's just no way. But because people don't argue with God, they end up turning away from God. And at the first sign of objection, they don't argue and they don't probe and they don't get beyond just the simple understanding. Ariana Grande, she had an interview a while ago, and she was asked, was religion a part of your life growing up? And she said this: I went to Catholic school, went to Catholic church, I did the Sunday church thing, and I think the Pope at the time was totally homophobic and totally not a fan of women at all, or like SpongeBob or Harry Potter even. And I was like, no, thank you. I can't do this. I'm out. I can't do this anymore. If we probe a little bit more, if we're willing to argue with God and not turn away at the first sign of unhappiness with who God is, or maybe isn't, because of someone else's understanding and interpretation of who God is, we miss on really diving in to what God would help us understand about who he is in this world. And can I challenge you for a second? Don't let some TikTok influencer or some celebrity social media reel turn you off from God, because easily we can flip through that stuff and we can assume that's who he is, rather than probing a little deeper. Rather than probing a little deeper into who God actually is. So here's Pilate. And like Pilate, you might be arguing with God thinking that Jesus isn't for you. You're not religious. You don't see him as being a king of this world. But here's the deal. Jesus is not for the religious. Jesus is not for the religious. Jesus is for everyone. He's for everyone. And Jesus didn't come to establish a group of people to be stuffy and uninviting. In fact, the harshest words that Jesus ever had for people, they were for the religious elite. They were for the people who were the rule followers. And let me give you an example, like the Apostle Paul. Paul grew up the ultimate rule follower, and he was like this Jewish perfectionist. He had rules for everything. It's kind of like the character Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, right? Like, there is a rule for everything. Don't you dare sit on his corner of the couch. That's his. But like Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory, there is this rule follower in the Jewish world, and Paul was so about that. He was the ultimate religious rule follower. But it wasn't until he became actually, what I should say is, it wasn't until he became a Jesus follower that he realized that following Jesus was not about being perfect. That was not about being religious even. that it was not about that at all. In fact, he gives us an idea of what life was like before he met Jesus. In Philippians chapter 3, verse 4, it says, though I myself have reasons for such confidence, if someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, meaning their confidence in their Jewish rule following, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regards to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for the righteousness based on the law, faultless. So here's Paul. This is his religious participation ribbons, like essay here. He's sharing with us why he was the religious elite. He was a Hebrew of Hebrews. He was part of the religious elite known as the Pharisees, the very people that end up killing Jesus. He had so much zeal and energy for killing Christians that he went all over the Roman Empire. He was considered righteous, and he was considered blameless. And to top it all off, he was really proud about being circumcised. Religion's weird sometimes. I don't get it. Makes no sense. But it is his religion that didn't lead him closer to God. It actually kept him away from God, from fully understanding who Jesus was and what his place was in this world. And miraculously, Paul gives his life to Jesus. And that's another story for another time. But the very people that he was trying to kill, he became just like. And there is this powerful moment where in Philippians 3, 7-9, he points out this, talking about what he gave up, talking about his past and how he saw it. He says this, but whatever gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage that I might gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith. What's so cool is that Paul has these two realities, these two spectrums that he lives out entirely. On one side, he was like the ultimate religious elite. He was the top dog in his religious world. He was very religious. On his other side, he lived a wild and crazy life, a really wild and crazy life. But yet, compared to who Jesus was, what he saw Jesus was becoming, making him be, how he saw that Jesus was inviting and for him, not something to oppose, but something to give his life to. As he saw that, he saw all the things that was holding him back from following Jesus, like religion, was like trash. It's like, he says it's like garbage. The language is even more intense than that, but I don't really want to share it with you. There's this sense at which he wants you to recognize, and for the readers to recognize, that man, his past, compared to what he gains with Jesus, it's so much better. It's so much more beautiful that he gained Jesus. The baggage from your past, the imperfection of who you are now, these don't disqualify you from Jesus. They make you right at home with him. And surprise, we all have baggage from our past. We all have imperfection in who we are. And yet Jesus can be for us. Jesus can be for us. No matter how great you've lived or how bad you have lived, Jesus can be for you. I remember when I was much younger and my youth leader at the time took me to lunch and we were having a conversation. At that time, my dad was a pastor. My parents met in seminary in Warsaw, Indiana. And I was just super proud of my parents' religious effort. Like, I was super proud of what they had done for the church and what they were doing for their church. I was just like, yeah, that's my mom and dad. I'm super excited about that. And I remember one time my youth leader and I were just having a discussion. We were kind of talking about the gospel. And as my youth leader was asking me questions, he eventually asked me this question, hey, Dan, if you were to die tonight and go to heaven, why would Jesus, what would you say to Jesus as to the reason why you should be let in? I said, oh, this is easy. I got this one unlocked. No problem. My dad's a pastor. That's right. He's going to get me in, no problem. Oh, man, we're such a religious family. It's fantastic. It was at that moment that he leaned in across the table. His face just became like downcast and sad. And he said, Dan, that's not enough. That's not enough. And then he proceeded to quote to me Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. For it is by grace you've been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. It's not by religion. It's not by works. It's not by what you do. It's not by what you achieve. It's not by what you earn. It's not what someone earned for you. It's simply by faith. Who do you believe Jesus to be? And it was like, as I was hearing the story, or as I was experiencing this moment in the story, I realized that what I was doing, or what my parents were doing, was not enough. I needed to understand who Jesus was, just me and him. I had to pursue a faith with Jesus for who he was, not who I saw my parents to be in his own eyes. So like Paul from Philippians, from this passage, any gain I thought I had with religion was a loss. It was not enough. It was not enough to gain Jesus at all. That's because Jesus is ultimately enough as he is, because you don't need to be religious. You just need Jesus. You don't need to be religious. It's not about doing and not doing. It's about just Jesus. And ultimately, maybe you think to yourself that you somehow don't fit into the perfect mold of what a Jesus follower it is. Or maybe you feel like because of your religious background that that's reason enough for you to be good with God. Or maybe you're on the opposite side of the spectrum, right? Maybe you feel that because of something inside of you, because of something you've done, because of some way that you have broken the rules, or some way that you feel broken inside. Maybe it's because you feel like those things have disqualified you for Jesus. Maybe it's because it's your questions or your addictions or your wounds or your bitterness or identity or who you love, and you're just too afraid. You're just too afraid to ask the question, to argue with God. Can I tell you from personal experience, though, that whatever things you feel like are holding you back from being accepted by God, let me tell you from personal experience, compared to Jesus, all of those things just are not great gain. That Jesus is ultimately greater. And sometimes it feels like we are living in these two worlds, like we got one foot in the door with Jesus and we got one foot outside the door with the world. And we're not totally sure about this Jesus thing. We're not totally sure about what he might challenge us to do or challenge us to give up. So we try and hold this balance between the two things. In reality, we just feel this dissonance, this brokenness, this sense of being torn apart between what Jesus wants and what our world wants. God desires for us not to live in those two steps, inside and outside of Jesus. But I want to say, fair warning, that Jesus loves you. And he will accept you for who you are. Jesus is for you. But he won't leave you who you are. He won't leave you who you are. In Philippians 3:9, it says, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ Jesus. Not having a righteousness, not having the right way to do things. So here's the deal. Jesus will change you. He will. Fair warning. He's going to. But you won't change because you feel like there's a religious pressure for you to do that. You'll change because you love, because you see the great gain that Jesus is. Because you see the great gain that experiencing life with him is. Those other things that are holding you back, that you keep arguing with God about, are important and can be painful and can be confusing and can be worrisome, and you need answers for some of those for sure. But ultimately, all of those things that you feel like disqualify you from Jesus, they're not enough because Jesus is enough. And so as Pilate has this question, he asks the question, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus has his response. He says in John 18, verse 36, he says this, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. Jesus, in this statement, it's got huge implications for our lives. And Pastor Brian will be talking about what that looks like in the future. But Jesus is a king, not of this world. He is a king for this world. He came not to be crowned by jewels, but by thorns. He leads not by force, but through service. He's a king that conquers hearts, not borders. He is a king. He is a king that loves and cares through service. He doesn't want us to follow him out of a religious obligation, but out of a joy from just following him for who he is. Jesus has pierced through the barriers of heaven to one day bring heaven down to us. That is our King, who brings peace, who brings joy, if not now, someday when he returns. And you can have access to this King because Jesus is for you. Not because of religious effort, but because of what Jesus did on Easter Sunday. And so leading into Easter, we're gonna look at the questions that Pilate asked Jesus. And we're gonna see the argument he has with Jesus himself. And we're gonna ask the questions. What's our argument with God? What's our challenge that's keeping us from fully accepting him? He already is for us. What's holding us back? And maybe this Easter Sunday, as we have baptisms, the thing that's holding you back just won't anymore. Not because they go away, not because life is solved, not because things are figured out for you, but simply because of Jesus. He's such great gain. That's why we recognize and celebrate communion. We do so because we recognize the sacrifice that he made for us, that we can see Jesus being for us because he died on the cross and shed his blood for the forgiveness of our sins so that we can live rightly before God, so that we can belong in his kingdom, in his family. And so before we take communion, we're going to step into worship. Would you pray with me? Father, there are so many things that we think disqualify us from Jesus. There's so many things that we feel like just get in the way of knowing him. Whether it's something we heard about Jesus, whether it's something that we once believed about Jesus, whether it's something we just feel broken about that we don't trust you with. God, whatever the thing is that's holding us back, may we ultimately see you as a greater gain. May we ultimately see you as someone worthy to follow. And so, Lord, I pray that you would reveal to us the truth that you have given to us. That, Lord, you are for us. Jesus is for us.
There was a moment when the lights went out. Death had claimed its victory. The King of love had given up his life. The darkest day in history. There on a cross they made for sinners. For every curse his blood atoned. For every breath and it was finished. But not the end we could have known. For the When the veil was torn, when sacrifice was made, as the heavens roar. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Lord of heaven and earth. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Savior of the world. The Savior of the world. There was a moment when the sky lit up, a flash of light breaking through. When all was lost across eternity, the King of Light was on the move. For in the dark room where our Lord is laid, one miraculous blood with the red All hail King Jesus. All hail Lord of heaven and earth. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Savior of the world. All hail Jesus. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Lord of heaven and earth. All hail King Jesus. All hail the Savior of the world.
Would you stand with me for communion? Jesus, on the night that he's betrayed, as a symbol for the disciples to remember why he came and what he was about ready to do, he took some bread and he broke it. He said, "This is my body broken for you. Take and eat in remembrance of me." Then Jesus grabbed some wine, and here we have some juice. And he said, "This is my blood shed for you. Take and drink in remembrance of me." God, we humbly recognize that Jesus was sent into this world to save us, to rescue us, to be for us, not because of what we do, not because of an upbringing, not because of anything that might get in the way. God, there's nothing that can get in the way. No brokenness, no imperfection, no guilt keeps us from you. Jesus, you are for us. And God, we pray that you wouldn't just leave us who we are, but you would change us more into your Son, Jesus. Because he is worthy. He's worthy to follow. He is worthy to pursue. And so, Lord, thank you for what you did on the cross, dying for us so that we might have life with you. I pray this all in your name. Amen. Don't forget, guys, we are going to have those commitment card spots in the back. Make sure you sign your one on there if you haven't already. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Tag, you're it.